Hello and welcome to another 1152 Club from home, and today's talk is connected with our Sounds of Our City exhibition. My name's Kitty Ross. I'm the Curator of Leeds History, and I'm going to talk about a pair of double basses made by the Dearlove family. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. This story starts back in 1848 and with an article in the Leeds Times headlined Jenny Lind in Leeds. Jenny Lind was a famous Swedish soprano and was a massive star. And the article says that before the concert, Jenny Lind and the artists who accompanied her were at the Scarborough Hotel. And while there, they examined a miniature violin, 5.5 inches long, manufactured by our fellow townsman, Mr. Dearlove, violin maker, after the Antonia Stradivarius model. Both Jenny and the musicians expressed themselves highly pleased with its completeness. Now, sadly, the violin mentioned there has long disappeared, but what we do have is this miniature double bass, which was part of a quartet of instruments made by Mark William Dearlove, and which he exhibited at the Great Exhibition in 1851 at Crystal Palace. These wonderful miniature instruments were passed down through the family, and some of them ended up in Australia. In 1951, a descendant of Mark William Dearlove, called Jack Dearlove, decided that they ought to be returned to Britain and put on display in the Victorian Albert Museum as part of the Festival of Britain. Once the Festival of Britain was over, Jack decided to bring the instruments up to Leeds, and in 1952 they were donated to Leeds City Museums. The miniature doubled bass is now on display at Leeds City Museum as part of the Leeds story. Shortly after this, Abbey House Museum began to develop its now famous street displays, which still exist, and in 1954 they began to build the new second street, which is now known as Harwood Square. The curator, who you can actually see in this photograph, was Maynard Mitchell, and he asked Jack Dearlove whether or not the family still had enough material that could be donated to Leeds Museums to create a music shop. And that's exactly what happened. In 1955, the new street was opened, and this is a photograph showing the Princess Royal opening it with Dr. Owen, who was the director of Leeds City Museums. The Princess Royal was Princess Mary, and she was married to the Earl of Harwood, which is why it's known as Harwood Square. The other thing you can notice in this photograph, there's actually a window, and that's what the crowd are looking through. This was blocked up very shortly afterwards, so this is the only photograph we have of that window, and it's now a blank wall. The Mark Dearlove shop stayed part of the street displays from the 1950s right through until 1998, and here it is as it was in Harwood Square between 1957 and 1959. In the early days, the Dearlove family often came to Abbey House and performed musical performances in the shop and in the street, and this is a photograph from 1958. It actually shows Jack Dearlove on the top left holding the double bass, and many other members of the Dearlove family. And this photograph, probably from the same occasion, shows 4 members of the family playing a string quartet inside the shop. Although for most of the time the Dearlove shop was located in Harwood Square, for a short time in the 1960s it was relocated to a bigger space in Stephen Harding Gate. And this photograph shows the interior of the shop when it was in that display, but it was then moved back in the 1970s to its original location in Harwood Square. And these 2 photographs from 1998 show the Mark Dearlove shop back in Harwood Square just before the museum closed for refurbishment to reopen in 2001. This photograph shows Mark William Dearlove, who was the maker of the miniature double bass. And he was the son of Mark Dearlove, who set himself up as a musical instrument maker and music seller on Boar Lane in 1797. His first recorded in the Leeds street directories in 1809. And he was the father of a great dynasty of musical instrument makers and musicians. So the photograph that you can see on the left shows Hannah Dearlove, who was the second wife of Mark Dearlove. And after he died, she continued running the shop, and it's her name that appears in directories. And the other photograph shows Mark William Dearlove Jr., who was one of Mark Dearlove's many grandsons. So here we have an example of one of the many violins made by the Dearlove family. And you can see the nice little detail of mother of pearl on the tailpiece. So here on the back there is the stamp name Dearlove. We don't know exactly whether this was made by Mark Dearlove, Mark William Dearlove, or even Joseph Dearlove, or any other members of the family who were involved in the Dearlove and Son firm. And it wasn't just instruments that were brought back and donated to the Abbey House Museum. The family had also kept a lot of the musical instrument making tools, and you can see a variety of them here. Now I'm going to talk about the other double bass in our collection. And we found a lot more about this one as a result of an inquiry a couple of years ago. A gentleman called Neil Heppleston got in touch to ask if we still had a Dearlove double bass in our collection. So as a result of this inquiry, Neil Heppleston came to the Discovery Centre to have a look at the double bass. As you can see from this photograph, it was in a rather sorry state, and we didn't know very much about it. So just by having a close look at it, Neil was able to tell us a lot more about the instrument. He told us that the body was made of either spruce or pine, that the neck was made of either sycamore or maple, and that fingerboard and tailpiece were both made of ebony. He also told us that the shape, which is a typical gamba shape and has a flat back, is very typical of instruments that were made in the north of England. So he spotted this mark stamped on the back just below the neck, which reads Dearlove Maker Leeds. And he also noticed a few other stamped letters around the neck, which said things like AB and AD. And we think these probably referred to chords that the player had to remember. But even more exciting, when he shone his torch inside the double bass, he found this paper label, which appears to read, "The double bass made by Mr. M. Dearlove, violin and bass maker for the Great Industrial Exhibition of All Nations, Crystal Palace, London, 1851. And then the date says Leeds, October the 21st, 1850 something. We can't quite read it, but it probably is 1851. So when we decided we wanted to do a music exhibition at Abbey House Museum, it was clear that if we wanted to display the double bass, it would need to be conserved. We invited several instrument restorers to come and have a look at the double bass, but it was clear that the best person for the job was Neil Heppleston, as he was a particular expert in making and restoring double basses. These photographs are photographs that he took in his studio when he basically took the instrument apart and then carefully put it back together again. You can see that it has been repaired many times in the past and patched together. It's really had an interesting life as an instrument, and a lot of that story is still there. So here you can see that it is being put back together again. It has been conserved for display only. We've not restored it to be played, and it would not take the tension to tune it up to concert pitch. But you can see that Neil made a marvellous job of it, and here it is when he brought it back to the Discovery Centre in the autumn of 2019. And here you can see a photograph of the double bass in its full restored glory, and also a detail from one of the many photographs we have in the Dearlove collection of Dearlove musicians. and this detail shows possibly the same double bass being played by a member of the Dearlove family in about 1900. So this is the full photograph, which shows the Dearlove band on the steps of the Royal Baths at Harrogate, and it shows John Thomas Dearlove and 5 of his sons, including Alfred Dearlove, who was born in 1881, who is the one holding the double bass. And this is another undated photograph from the Dearlove collection. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly who's in this photograph, but again, it shows the double bass. And from a lot of these photographs, we can see that the bass at that time only had 3 strings, which was quite common when it was being played in a band or a dance band. And so the 4th string, which it now has, must have been added at a later date so that it could be played in an orchestra. Thank you for listening. Obviously, we are currently shut, but you will be able to see both double basses on display when our sites reopen. And I'm delighted to say that the Abbey House Museum Sounds of Our City exhibition has been extended until the end of 2021, so hopefully there will be a good chance to see it. Thank you.